Hi there, and welcome to Military Histories, a podcast from York Army Museum. Each week we share an interview from the Royal Dragoon Guards audio archive. This season we will be sharing interviews with veterans of the Korean War. You can find more details about the Royal Dragoon Guards Oral History Project in the show notes. If you want to find out a bit more about our museum, there are links to our website and social media channels in the show notes too. In this week's interview you can hear Major Ray Cooke describing his army experiences. The first 10 minutes of this interview focus on Ray's time in Korea. Thanks for listening. Future episodes will drop every Friday.
This is an interview of Major QM Ray Cooke, 5th Royal Inniskilling Dragoon Guards, by Colonel Mark Faulkner on the 18th of December 2013 in Darlington. Ray, can you start by telling us about your early career in the army and how you came to join the Skins?
Well, it all started off when I got to the age of 18 and obviously national service. I was deferred initially because I was training to be a quantity surveyor. However, it took me 6 months to realise that all my contemporaries had gone into the army. So I jacked in night school and joined the army. And I started off by reporting to Catterick in April 1950, which was the 8th Royal Tank Regiment, training regiment at the time. After basic training, where I was allocated 1 RTR, in 1950 I ended up in Hobart Barracks in Detmold. Early 1981 I volunteered to serve in Korea.
That was 1951.
1951, sorry. Oh, that's it, isn't it?
Yep.
And I was posted in the field on exercise at Saltow from 1 RTR to 5th Royal Inniskilling Dragoon Guards. From then, all the preparations took place and we went to Aldershot to reform, and I was promoted Lance Corporal. We had a long boat journey to Korea, which took 5 weeks, but we were very lucky because it was on a converted luxury liner, the Georgic, and we arrived in Korea in December 1951. I was a troop leader's operator to start with. Then, as time went on, I was promoted to corporal and got my own tank. I was a tank commander, still in 1st Troop of B Squadron. The thing about Korea of all was the seasonal changes. Every one of them was drastic in their own way. But the most interesting thing that I had, I was the left-hand tank of the British sector, and I was stationed on top of a hill which was called 355, and it overlooked the whole of the valley. And after a while, they moved the Americans out because they weren't making any progress on keeping the river and the bridge. So the British contingent, which pushed out the American contingent, was now Skins. And on the initial impact of taking over, we came across the hook, the battle honour, which is on the regimental flag. Well, being the left-hand tank, I had an absolute bird's eye view of this particular battle that particular day, and I couldn't do a single thing about it, as far as shooting to help out or anything like that. After a year in Korea, on a troop ship again, spending Christmas at sea, we went to Egypt for another year starting in January 1953.
And what were you doing in Egypt?
In Egypt, we didn't do anything drastic. Well, all it was we looked at and patrolled along the Suez Canal, and when the Arab Israelis or whatever pulled their tanks up the other side, we would counteract them and just sit there and look at them. So we didn't basically do any
deterrence.
Well, as a deterrent, yeah.
Yeah.
So there we are in Egypt in 1953. In the August of 53, I was promoted to a sergeant and sent on a drill course to Pirbright, which was the worst thing that ever happened in my military career. I went there and I had sort of KD and rough old things, and all the boys there from the units in the UK, they all sat there and they had their own rifles and everything. So it was a rough first week.
Yeah.
But I settled down, and in fact I actually enjoyed it. So on completion of the course in Pirbright, went through all the rigmarole of getting back to Egypt, to be told when I arrived there I should have been sent to Catterick as part of the advance party. So from there on towards the end of Egypt, another troop ship back to the UK, and then in early 1954 to Catterick to be a drill instructor, ironically in the same buildings as I trained in 4 years previously.
Yeah.
Initially, I was also, apart from just normal everyday training, I was given the honour of being in charge of the commanding officer's guard for all the visiting dignitaries.
With your high standard of drill from Pirbright.
Right, so things went on, and I courted and married in January 1955 to a girl from the local area. Flora, little knowing then how much she would figure in the regimental life during the following 27 years she was destined to spend in it.
Yeah. A fate that befits most wives, I think, probably. They don't know what to expect when they marry an army person.
Because it fallen back in my normal training, I was sent on a wireless course to Bovington in 1955, and then spent the rest of the time in Catterick Garrison as a wireless instructor till the end of 1956. As we all know, we went to Senelager after Catterick, and as a B Squadron Signal Sergeant, I was in that job until August 1958. In 1959, as a result of the wireless course in 1955, I was called back by Bovington as a school's instructor on the wireless wing. This I enjoyed thoroughly.
And then you went back to Senelager after that.
And then, well, during the wireless wing tour, I was seconded to the radio trials unit wing in Bovington, and I was then made a staff sergeant. So we returned to Senelager early in '62 as the officers' mess staff sergeant. I knew I had to go back to the regiment because Colonel Harry Walker called in on Bovington and said, "I want you to come back and run the officers' mess for me." And so that's how I ended back in the regiment, although I would have been going towards the end of my tour there.
Back in Senelager.
Back in Senelager. So officers mess staff sergeant, remaining in the job at Tidworth until 1964, when I was promoted squadron sergeant major, A Squadron, and being involved in what was known as Exercise Steel Shaft, which was the mobilisation of the stockpile of tanks in the Aden base in North Africa. So we took them out and put them back in preservation, and that was that. During all this, I had a son, Anthony, who was born in 1962. As a Squadron Sergeant Major, A Squadron, we went to Aden in December 64 for a year, unaccompanied, which wasn't very popular with anybody in the regiment. And at that time, everybody had to find out where they wanted to live, unless they could find some obscure married quarter in some other place.
So some people came out, although unofficially, to join you in Aden, or they had to find their own home in England.
In England, yeah.
Right, okay. And then he moved on. What were you doing?
During Aden, A Squadron and B Squadron, we changed over. We did 6 months each in Bahrain as the Seaborne Tank Force for the Persian Gulf. Right. This entails having tanks on ship. Some of those ships, they were reputed to have been made for a one-over crossing at the end of World War II.
Oh dear. So they might not have survived.
Yeah, but it was interesting, really, because as we changed over, there were 2 ships, and as we changed over, we had to get the tanks from one ship to the other, and from that ship to that ship, and each ship had a big floating, well, just a
jetty type,
a jetty platform, with an outboard motor in each corner, and how we did it. But you tell me how we got those tanks one at a time crossed over and all in.
Like dropping any in the sea.
Yeah, no, we never dropped any in the sea. But we did do one very interesting exercise in the Gulf, to which Colonel Henry Woods came up with us. And it was interesting because, I mean, we did come off the ships onto this deserted island, and you can imagine temperatures in the 40s and things. And at the end of 3 days, when we got him back, I think he was a bit knackered.
And he was commanding officer at the time?
He was commanding officer at the time. Yeah, I thought we'd nearly lost him at one stage.
Yeah. Those temperatures are extreme, aren't they?
So after Aden, I was still Squadron Sergeant Major of A Squadron, and I took the squadron to Cyprus as the United Nations Armoured Car Squadron, and we were actually accompanied. It was the posting of a lifetime.
Yeah. Whereabouts in Cyprus were you?
In Cyprus, we're in a camp called Ziggy. Z-I-I, Z-Y-I...
T-G-Y.
Z-Y-Y-I.
Oh, right.
Ziggy, which was about 5 miles outside Limassol.
Yeah.
And obviously at that time, there was still a green line on the island with the Eoka in the mountains and everything. Yeah. And we had troops, what we call up country, in the Paphos area mainly. as well as the main road at the entrance to our camp in Ziggy.
Yeah.
There was a troop there. Right, so that all went well there. We didn't actually get involved in any out-and-out conflict. Whilst I was there, and the regiment was in Benghazi, I was promoted to RQMS in late 1966, but remained in Cyprus for the stability. However, the regimental football team from Benghazi went to England with Len Green, the quartermaster, to play in the Cavalry Cup. And they chose the right time because I had to go across to Benghazi, and it was just at that time that the Arab-Israeli war started. And it was an interesting thing because we were doing a parade at the headquarters, the sort of brigade headquarters, because our camp was way out in the desert.
Yeah.
And there was an uneasy feeling about the whole place. And nobody could put a pinpoint to it. Anyway, instead of going to the sergeant's mess and everything, we all went back to camp. And 2 days later, the Arab-Israeli war started.
And that was the 1967 war.
Yeah. That was interesting in so much as that day we all stood to and on parade and given a talk. I can't remember who the commanding officer was. Anyway, the net result was everybody went to the vehicles. I went up the ammunition compound. We bombed all the cars up, and I was left there with an empty ammunition compound. But they did go down because they were worried about the British Embassy and the American Embassy. And as you've probably been told before, which was Major Taylor at the time, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, he got burnt.
He got burned.
Someone threw a firebomb in his ferry.
That's right.
Yeah.
But otherwise, that was the only thing that saved it. The other redeeming factor for some of the embassy staff was that we had a helicopter troop, and they got the last few people out.
And then you left Benghazi and went via Malta?
No, yes. It was soon after that. In fact, it was September 1967, having been invited to leave the country.
Yeah.
We went to another interesting place, Wheaton Camp, near Blackpool. It was interesting in so much as we didn't have any bosses, and we didn't really have a role in life. And so we spent quite a lot of time recuperating and making the most of Blackpool.
Yeah. And there was a story about you on St. Patrick's Day with a broken leg.
Oh, that doesn't come till 1970.
Oh, right. No. So that wasn't in Wheaton.
Sorry, I went to Wheaton still as RQMS.
Right, yeah. And then promoted to
And
RSM.
then April 1968, I was promoted RSM.
Right.
From then to Hereford, still as RSM. And in 1970, the dreaded officers versus sergeants football match, in which I was tackled and I fractured a femur.
And that was on St. Patrick's Day.
That was on St. Patrick's Day.
And spirits were high.
And spirits were high. Now that was a long recovery because in those days I went on traction.
Yeah.
It was a particularly nasty, it was a spiral break as well. a spiral break, the biggest bone in your body.
Painful.
You sort of know about it. But these days it would have been pinned,
Yeah.
and I would have been walking within 2 weeks. No two ways about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, whilst laid in hospital, being visited by quite a few people, obviously,
Yeah.
and they all took, because the hospital was in Munster, so there's Hereford to Munster, and everybody was very good at bringing Flora in every evening, you know.
Yeah.
And then Colonel Guy Watton appeared one day, and he said, I don't think he quite knew what to say or how to put it. He says, "Mr. Cooke, we would like you to take a quartermaster's commission."
Which is brilliant.
So I was laid there, unable to move.
And celebrate.
Anyway, the recovery took me about 6 months in total. But that allowed me to go back to the UK and attend a quartermaster's course. And from Hereford, whilst I was in my recovery, the regiment moved to Munster and converted back to tanks. It was in 1970. So December 70, commissioned and became quartermaster technical.
Dealing with all the new equipment of Chieftain.
Yes. No, well, everything was new to us, including the technical support and whatnot. Life wasn't easy for quite a long time. But the regiment went on and made a name for themselves, and I can't think of anything sort of in particular that happened at that period. So in November 1973, to May 1974, we went to take over the United Nations infantry role, which was interesting again. Obviously, there was only one quartermaster because the other one had to stay in Germany.
So you did both roles in
Did
Cyprus?
both roles, yes. Back to Munster, back to Tech. January 75, we went to Catterick. As the RAC training regiment. I was still technical quartermaster, but in August 1976, still at Catterick, I changed over to quartermaster boots and socks. December 76 to Osnabrück as quartermaster of what was a reconstructed armoured regiment, was sort of settling down to everything that had been new. Over all these years, since 1955, Flora became known as the mother of the regiment, with a font of information and experience. She controlled the Wives Club and everything wherever we'd been.
Yeah.
And she was absolutely loved by all the wives. And we'd actually been lucky with me having spent so many years with the regiment.
Yeah. So everybody knew you
Yeah.
both very well. And such an important role, that unpaid social worker.
Indeed. Plenty of problems with them as well.
Yeah.
Now, During this time, Anthony, our son, had been in Ham boarding school, and he didn't want to go further than, he didn't want to stay there longer than his GCSEs.
Yeah.
So it became obvious to me that it was time to bail out. Not bail out literally, but it was time to move and get back to the UK to get him established. So in 1979, I was offered a posting in Sutton Coldfield as an Army Personnel Selection Officer. So I went on a course and came back, and well, it's the end of 1979, and we went to Sutton Coldfield. Anthony became a police cadet. He passed all his exams, and he decided that he wanted to remain in Sutton Coldfield. But Flora and I had been itching to get further north, which didn't work out. By being in Sutton Coldfield. Very interesting job. I've got to admit that I never actually selected anybody for the regiment whilst I was in the post. So there was a camp commandant's job came up in North West District. That was really the wrong side of the country for me, but I thought it might be a bit more interesting than personnel selecting. The trouble being, I'd spent so long with the regiment. I lived regimental life, and on ERE jobs like that, you don't actually live regimental life. So I took the camp commandant's job in North West District at Preston in October 1981. That didn't work out either, because as a district like that, I didn't even have a GD man or anything to do anything.
You do everything yourself.
I was a lackey, and so that signed and sealed it. So in 1982, I resigned my commission age 50 because financially that was the right time, and I retired to Darlington.
And since then, you've been involved in local life.
Do you want me to do what I've done after resigning?
Yes, it'd just be interesting to hear what you've done since then.
Well, I didn't actually come out into civilian life at a very good time. And everybody told me you should have stayed in the army because there's no jobs, there's no nothing, you know. It's been pig-headed. I came and I applied in the first 6 months. I didn't have a job. I applied in the first 6 months for 65 different posts. I got 1 or 2 interviews, but I'm sorry, but I was absolutely too clever for them.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound big-headed, but I was. Anyway, I ended up as a training officer for Sedgefield District Council. And I survived there for 1.5 years, and they had a reshuffle and showed their appreciation of my expertise by making me redundant.
Great.
Typical council, I've put.
Yes.
Now, in between times, I was still on a retired officer's roll. And in 1983, living in Darlington and North East District being in York, I got the post of a retired officer's family and housing and welfare officer. And it was called Tyne Tees. Yep. It actually covered any married quarters north of Catterick up to the Scottish border.
So a big patch.
Big patch, very spread out. Lovely job. My nearest boss was in York. No, thoroughly enjoyable. There was only 6 of us, 2 wardens, a PA, and a typist, and a labourer, and it was a really fulfilling job. And in the process, there was a regiment moved into. Is it Fulwood Barracks? No.
Fulford.
No, that's York.
Oh.
No, just outside Newcastle. Anyway, they changed from a training unit to a service unit, and I had a really interesting job buying £1.5 million worth of houses in the Newcastle area. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I was back with all my connections to the army and everything like that. And I retired fully in 1960 when I was 65.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Ray.